Hello and welcome to another episode of the Science on the Edge podcast. I'm Dr. Mike Darcy and today we're going to be discussing a molecule called quercetin. Now, quercetin is something that even if you've not heard of it, you've certainly ingested it, or at least almost certainly ingested it. It's present in everything from apples to onions to garlic. In relatively small quantities. Well, depends on the product actually. It does vary a lot, but you can get it in supplement form. So what's the fuss with quercetin? Well, it seems that a number of experiments have shown that quercetin is anti-carcinogenic, it protects the heart, protects the brain, it reduces blood pressure, and it has all sorts of other very useful benefits too. So let's get started. Let's delve right in. Okay, so quercetin, here we go. So first of all, we want to know a little bit about senescent cells because quercetin seems to affect senescent cells. Senescent cells are sometimes known as the silent assassins. They build up in our bodies as we get older, they release all sorts of nasty chemicals, and they speed up the aging process and in some cases make us more susceptible to cancers. So getting rid of these things is probably a good idea. So senescent cells, they are sort of endpoint cells. They are cells which can no longer divide, they have become worn out, they've become damaged, and rather than do the good thing, which is just to enter a process called apoptosis, which is basically cellular suicide, occasionally these senescent cells just hang around in our tissues and organs. They exist throughout the bodies and tissues of humans. They accumulate with age, not just humans, I should say, other animals too. They do accumulate with age. They release factors that cause inflammation and dysfunction. The senescence-associated secretory phenotype, it's known as, or SASP. Senescent cells accumulate with aging and at important sites in multiple chronic diseases. They just build up, release all sorts of nasty chemicals, attract the immune system, cause inflammation, and just make your body generally less efficient and less capable of surviving. By the time we reach old age, we have a large number of senescent cells in our bodies. Okay, so what about quercetin? Okay, so quercetin, what is it and what does it do? Well, this is what it looks like. Probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you, but it does mean a little bit to me because this molecule is very similar to a number of other flavonoids and polyphenols, plant polyphenols, many of which also have beneficial effects in the human body. For example, resveratrol, which I've talked about before, is quite a potent polyphenol that seems to be protective against cancer and Alzheimer's and heart disease. And the molecular structure of quercetin is not dissimilar to it. So let's delve a bit more in depth with it. So quercetin is a polyphenol, basically a molecule you find in plants. It's also a natural flavonoid found abundantly in vegetables and fruits. There's growing evidence suggesting that quercetin has therapeutic potential for the prevention and treatment of many different diseases, including cardiovascular disease, which kills so many people in developed nations these days, cancer, another big killer, and neurodegenerative disease, which affects most of us if we live long enough. Neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, for example. Mechanistically, quercetin has been shown to exert antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and anti-cancer activities in a number of cellular and animal models. This basically means both when tested on individual cells or colonies of cells in the lab, or when basically tested on animals, laboratory animals. But it's also been tested on humans, and it seems to modulate the signaling pathways and gene expression profiles involved in these processes, modulates our genes, basically, our gene expression. Quercetin inhibits NF-kappa beta activation, and by doing so, it helps to downregulate the immune system's inflammatory response. Basically, NF-kappa beta is a protein, well, actually it's a group of proteins that are sort of bound together, that promote inflammation in the body, the inflammatory response. And so many diseases are caused by inflammation. Everything from Alzheimer's to heart disease are linked with inflammation. Inflammation is useful for your immune system to fight infections in the short term, but when it's overactive, it can cause all sorts of problems. So we want to keep it sort of dialed down, and Quercetin seems to help with that process. In vitro and animal models, that means in the lab, in a test tube, and in animal models, we've shown that quercetin, which has a similar structure to the molecule resveratrol, as I mentioned earlier, has a large range of biological actions, including anti-carcinogenic, anti-inflammatory, and antiviral activities too. It also attenuates, that means sort of reduces lipid peroxidation, platelet aggregation, and capillary permeability, which basically means it sort of dials down this immune response, dials down inflammation. Quercetin, as a proteasome activator with antioxidant properties, also increases cellular lifespan by increasing survival and viability of an experimental model of primary human fibroblasts, so skin cells. It seems to make these cells live longer. Quercetin has antiviral properties, which we cannot overemphasize, especially in the times of COVID. It also has anti-amyloid. You pronounce it right. I always have difficulty with these words for some reason. I should be better at this being a scientist, but never mind. Anti-amyloidogenic properties. Now, amyloids, beta amyloid, is a molecule, protein that builds up in the brain. Builds up in the brain during the day. We tend to wash it away during deep sleep, but it can gradually accumulate in the brain and in the body over the course of a lifetime. In fact, it can build up to such a large extent that it can start to cause all sorts of diseases. For example, Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease, its almost signature kind of trait is the fact that the brain of someone with Alzheimer's is actually riddled with beta amyloid. And quercetin seems to help remove amyloid, so clear it out of the brain, which cannot be a bad thing. But amyloid also builds up all through the body, including the heart, where it is also linked with heart disease too. So getting rid of amyloid is a good thing, and quercetin seems to be able to do that. So it counters the generation of amyloid and suppresses amyloidosis, common feature of Alzheimer's disease. Quercetin also downregulates the pro-inflammatory MIR155 and the oncomere MIR21 and upregulates MIR125B. Now, without going into detail about what these things do, let's just say that the result of downregulating these products means that we can downregulate inflammation, reduce inflammation throughout the body. So what else does it do? Well, all sorts of things. First of all, heart disease. It has been shown that it can attenuate some of the problems with heart disease, even prevent the condition to a certain degree. It's useful in terms of removing cholesterol. It seems to be able to block some of cholesterol's negative effects and basically reduce the levels of cholesterol in the blood. It reduces hypertension. Hypertension is high blood pressure, and quercetin has been shown to reduce blood pressure. And blood pressure, known as, well, the silent killer, is something that affects so many people in the developed world. You don't get any symptoms outwardly, usually, when you have high blood pressure until you have the heart attack or the stroke. So reducing hypertension, high blood pressure, is a very good thing indeed. It's also been shown to reduce the symptoms of a disease called Interstitial Cystitis. I probably all know what cystitis is. It's burning sensation that you can get, this urge to urinate. The symptoms can be reduced by quercetin. Prostatitis, so an inflamed prostate. there have been a few studies that show that quercetin seems to reduce that condition, the effects of that condition. Rheumatoid arthritis, there's only limited evidence regarding rheumatoid arthritis. It does seem that quercetin may reduce the symptoms of that condition. And also cancer. It seems to be both anti-carcinogenic, so protective against cancer, and it also seems to slow down the progress of cancer once it has begun. So let's delve into that a little bit more. So first of all, the heart. Quercetin and heart disease. In vitro, animal, and some population-based studies, it suggested that quercetin may reduce the risk of atherosclerosis, which is basically the buildup of plaque, fats, and dead cells, that kind of thing, in the arteries, which often leads to heart attack or stroke. Quercetin appears to protect against the damage caused by LDL, low-density lipoproteins, which is basically the bad cholesterol, the bad fat in your body, and thus may help reduce the risk of death from heart disease or stroke. Some studies show that quercetin supplementation reduces blood pressure in people with hypertension too, which again is going to help with, well, it's going to be protective against heart disease and stroke. Blood pressure leads to both of those conditions. Quercetin and cancer. Cancer, very, very big killer. 1 in 2 people in the developed world will suffer from cancer at some point in their life. But quercetin seems to be quite protective. Quercetin has been observed to inhibit the growth of cancer cells from breast, colon, prostate, ovarian, endometrial, and lung tumors. One study found that frequent intake of quercetin-rich foods, which I'll talk about a little later, was associated with lower lung cancer risk. The association was even stronger among subjects who smoked more than 20 cigarettes daily. So it seems to neutralize some, I should say some, no one should smoke. It does seem to neutralize some of the effects of tobacco. Another study suggests that quercetin slows down tumor growth in the lab, specifically in leukemia cells. So it has anti-carcinogenic properties. It also seems to reduce the severity of various allergies. In several animal models, quercetin suppresses anaphylactic responses in sensitized rats, for example. It also inhibits asthmatic inflammation in guinea pigs and rats. In vitro studies have shown that quercetin stabilizes the membranes of mast cells. These are the cells that produce and secrete histamine. It's histamine that gives you all of the nasty effects of an allergy. It reduces the release of histamine. So basically, these mast cells produce less histamine, release less histamine, and the take-home message there is that you end up with less strong effects to various allergens. So it's anti-allergenic. And that makes sense, as it's also anti-inflammatory, and inflammation, well, it's quite a common symptom in allergies. Okay, so sources and dosage, let's delve into that. So sources of quercetin, first of all. Quercetin is found in large concentrations in apples, honey, raspberries, onions, red grapes, cherries, citrus fruits, and green leafy vegetables. Quercetin content is exceptionally high in onions. While quercetin generally is found in citrus fruits, apples, onions, parsley, sage, tea, and red wine, olive oil, grapes, dark cherries, and dark berries such as blueberries, blackberries, and bilberries are also high in quercetin. Fried or boiled foods contain lower quercetin, so be careful with that. Boiling causes a reduction in quercetin levels specifically. Some of it will leach into the water, some of it will be destroyed. Long-term storage of foods changes quercetin content too. Onions lose their quercetin content by up to 33% in the first 12 days of storage. Quercetin levels in strawberries, however, increase by approximately 32% when stored at -20 for 9 months. Not that anyone could do that, but you know, interesting factoid. Growth conditions of plants is a factor that influences quercetin levels, with a higher quercetin content in plants exposed to larger amounts of UV radiation. Quercetin is poorly absorbed, so pure quercetin taken in a pill form can be difficult to absorb. Not necessarily a lot of it gets into your bloodstream. However, when taken with vitamin C, absorption is greatly enhanced, and you can actually get quercetin pills with vitamin C, or you could just get quercetin and vitamin C and take them together. In terms of dosage, in human studies, a dosage of quercetin up to 1,000 milligrams per day showed no adverse effects, either in the blood, hematology, in the liver, or in the kidney function. Quercetin inhibited beta amyloid-induced neuronal cell death in the hippocampus. So hippocampus is part of your brain that is involved in forming new memories. Basically, it's the first victim of Alzheimer's disease. So you don't want damage to your hippocampus. And it seems that quercetin has inhibited, at least in the lab, beta amyloid-induced neuronal cell death in cultures of hippocampal cells at very low concentrations, in fact, 5 to 20 micromole. So even at small amounts, it seems to inhibit this sort of damage to the hippocampus, which is a feature of many neurodegenerative diseases. It also stimulated cytotoxicity at a concentration of about 40 micromole, but that's in a lab. That's when you put it directly onto the cells, a little bit different in the body. When combined with a compound known as bilobalide, it was found to increase the level of BDNF, brain-derived growth factor, in the brains of mice. Now, BDNF is very interesting. BDNF allows neurons to grow, allows them to make new connections with each other. Basically, it's what's being produced when you learn, when you absorb new information. So it's kind of like a smart factor, so to speak. And it seems that, at least in combination with bilobalide, it increases the amounts of this factor in the brain. Okay, so just to summarize, I would just like to say that there's a lot of evidence that quercetin is extremely good for you, and very little evidence that it has any negative consequences. Obviously, as a disclaimer, this is still relatively early days. There are many experiments still to be done, but it's probably no coincidence that the sorts of diets that are rich in quercetin, for example, the Mediterranean diet, not to mention the Japanese diet, those people that take those diets tend to, on average, live much longer. And it may be the quercetin that at least is partially responsible for this. So my advice would be to maybe give quercetin a shot. Give it a shot. Obviously, this is not medical advice. I'm not saying that it will cure your cancer or your heart disease or your hypertension, but it seems that it helps in many of these conditions. I take quercetin myself. Well, okay, thank you very much for listening or watching, depending on whether you're viewing this on YouTube or via a podcast app. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you'd like to keep me motivated, then you can always pop over to scienceontheedge.com and click on the donate button. Just a small donation, either via Patreon or via PayPal, will help to keep me motivated. If you want to know a little bit more about me, then again, scienceontheedge.com is one place to go. Alternatively, you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is @MarkOfTheD, MarkOfthed. That's all for now, and I look forward to speaking with you all again very soon. Goodbye for now.